Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Giving USA 2022, the latest trends in giving, a virtual forum on philanthropy presented by Campbell and Company. We're delighted that you're with us today. Before we get started, let's review our webinar best practices to ensure that you have an optimal experience with us today. First, please close any programs other than GoToWebinar, of course, that are running on your computer. Second, please consider calling in using a phone instead of your computer speakers. And finally, if you experience visual issues, please send us a chat or contact GoToWebinar at 800-263-6317. A final note is that as we go through the material today, we would welcome your questions, and we do have time set aside at the end of the webinar to take a number of questions. So please use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar menu to tell us what's on your mind and how we might help you interpret the data further. Now for some introductions. I'm Kate Roosevelt, co-president of Campbell and Company, and I'm pleased to be co-hosting this webinar today with Peter Fissinger, senior advisor of Campbell and Company and chair of the Giving Institute. We are also grateful to have three exceptional leaders with us today as panelists: Nathan Dietz from the Do Good Institute, Mary Dana Hinton from Hollins University, and Eboo Patel from Interfaith America. You'll learn more about each of them from Peter in just a few minutes. For those of you who might be hearing about Giving USA for the first time today, and for those of you who might want a refresher, Giving USA is the longest-running, most comprehensive annual report on charitable giving in the United States. It is presented by two organizations: the fundraising professionals at Giving USA Foundation, a public service initiative of the Giving Institute, and the research team at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. The report is made possible by contributions from the Giving Institute's member firms, and I understand that every member firm supported the report this year. Thank you, along with foundations and other donors. Campbell and Company is a proud member of the Giving Institute. So let's dive into the report now and share some context. Unsurprisingly, the seismic events of 2020, most notably the COVID-19 pandemic and the movements for racial and social justice, continued to affect giving in 2021. We know that economic conditions also affect giving, and the picture there is mixed. On the one hand, both the stock market and gross domestic product had recovered to pre-pandemic levels by early 2021 and continued to grow throughout the year. On the other hand, inflation began to rise and personal disposable income grew only modestly. Other factors that nonprofits will need to stay abreast of to stay healthy amid new and ongoing challenges include technology, how people engage and how they give, and please note that online giving reached a new high of 12% of total giving in 2021. Flexibility amid volatility, so how are nonprofits adapting to staffing challenges, supply chain issues, alongside the increasing demand for their services, and finally alternatives, and really a profound increasing interest in cryptocurrency and other ways of giving. So here we are. The key takeaway from the report this year for giving in 2021 is that giving grew 4% to $484.5 billion. While the number is up and the 10-year trend is very positive, giving in 2020 was actually relatively flat when adjusted for inflation. So where did these gifts come from? The vast majority of giving continues to be driven by individuals directly as well as through foundations and bequests. You also see here that corporate giving rebounded in 2021 due to increases in both pre-tax profits and gross domestic product. Where did the gifts go? Because of the challenges that we've faced over the past 2 years, it is most helpful to look at both 1 and 2 year results. The percentages to the left of the graph on this slide are the 2 year results, and you'll see that every sector, except for religion and health, grew by more than 10% in 2020 and 2021 combined. As I noted just a minute ago, individuals and foundations continue to play a significant, some would say outsized role in giving across the United States. This is especially important given the fact that mega gifts comprised 5% of all individual giving last year, a total of $15 billion. Many of our colleagues in the arts and culture and health sectors breathed a sigh of relief in 2021 as giving to their sectors rebounded, in large part due to strong stock market performance, as well as a return to live performances and in-person events. While giving to international affairs, human services, and education organizations grew dramatically in 2020, these sectors cooled off in 2021. And in these sectors, again, it's helpful to look at the 2 year data, which paints a clearer picture of the trends. As we move forward, we're keeping a close eye on giving to environmental animals organizations, public society benefit organizations, and that includes civic organizations and groups like the ACLU and United Way, and foundations, given that each of these sectors saw steady growth in both 2020 and 2021. Public society benefit and foundations, their performance is really linked to the performance of the stock market, and we're heartened by the fact that in the environmental and animal organization sector, we're seeing a diversification and broadening of their donor bases, both by age and by income. So what's the bottom line? Giving continues to be driven by individuals and is quite top-heavy. New ways of giving are gaining in popularity, especially among the super wealthy. And all nonprofits must focus on retention as many donors are returning to their favorite causes following the darkest days of the pandemic. At this point, I'd like to hand the proverbial microphone over to my colleague, Peter Fissinger. I will turn my camera off, and if Peter and our 3 panelists could please turn their cameras on at this point, I will stop screen sharing and we will move into our panel discussion. Give us just a minute to transition here.
All set? Everybody ready to go? Okay. Thanks, Kate. Thank you for that overview, and happy Giving USA data release date. It's always an exciting day for us at Campbell and Company. We're really pleased to be able to be involved in funding the research and sharing it with you. We learn over the years that people are very interested in the data, especially as it relates to the experiences of people who are leading institutions and engaged in research. So we've learned that what you love is a terrific panel discussion, and I hope you agree that we've been able to put that together today. I'd like to introduce our panelists first, if I could. First of all, Nathan Dietz is the Associate Research Scholar and Senior Researcher with the Do Good Institute, which is part of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. His research focus is social capital, volunteering, charitable contributions, civic engagement, and social entrepreneurship. He's done peer-reviewed articles recently in the Nonprofit and Voluntary Sector Quarterly, the American Journal of Community Psychology, and the Nonprofit Policy Forum. He's also the principal investigator for a research project commissioned by the Generosity Commission, which we'll talk about a little bit because he's doing this research, and Eboo Patel is a member of the Generosity Commission. Nathan has a Ph.D. from political science from the University of Rochester and earned his BA in political science and mathematical methods at Northwestern. Welcome, Nathan. Thanks for being here today. Mary Hinton is president of Hollins University. Founded in 1842, Hollins University is an independent liberal arts university serving undergraduate women and also has select graduate programs for men and women. It's in Roanoke, Virginia. Prior to Hollins, Mary served for 6 years as president of the College St. Benedict, a Catholic college for women in St. Joseph, Missouri. She serves on several boards, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, where she chairs the President's Trust, the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, St. Mary's School, and Interfaith America, also the Teagle Foundation. Mary has a Ph.D. in religion and religious education from Fordham University. She earned a Master of Arts in Clinical Psychology at the University of Kansas at Lawrence, and her Bachelor in Art was from Williams College. In 2021, Mary was elected to the Academy of Arts and Sciences. Congratulations on that, Mary, and welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Finally, Eboo Patel is founder of Interfaith America. Interfaith America inspires, equips, and connects leaders and institutions to unlock the potential of religious diversity. It works across higher education, racial equity, health, workplace, bridge building, democracy, and technology. Eboo was named as one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report, and he also served on President Barack Obama's inaugural Faith Council. Eboo is the author of 5 books, including the recently released We Need to Build, which if you look over my shoulder, you can see it on my bookshelf there. It's a really fascinating book. I highly recommend it. Eboo holds a doctorate in sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. So we have a great group of people, and I'm really excited to get this started. You know, I just want to start by asking each of you to maybe say a little bit more about your organization, the work it does, and how it relates to the Giving USA data. And then finally, finish off with just give me sort of a 20,000-foot personal/professional reaction to the data. What struck you? How does it align with your personal experience? What else comes to mind? I'm going to start with you, Eboo. Welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Peter, and it's wonderful to be here with you and with Mary and Nathan. So I'm the founder and president of an organization called Interfaith America. It's the United States' largest organization that engages religious diversity directly and in a focused way. Our big idea is that faith should be a bridge of cooperation, not a barrier of division, and lots of good things happen when we nurture our religious diversity in that direction. Multiplied social capital, strengthened social cohesion, the continuity of identity communities, reduced prejudice, narratives for diverse democracies, et cetera, et cetera. We have lots of programs on college campuses with people like my friend and board member, Mary Hinton, and we are also increasingly working with private companies and community foundations in the tech space and with government agencies. So a couple of things have struck me about philanthropic trends in the past couple of years. This is not specifically about the data that was presented, Peter, as I mentioned to you and Kate earlier, but I think it's a big trend worth noting and discussing. And that is the increase in large unrestricted gifts to a set of nonprofit organizations. The Mackenzie Scott set of gifts are probably the best known, but Darren Walker actually at the Ford Foundation, I think that he might have been ahead of the curve on this when he said 5 or 6 years ago when he came into the presidency of Ford that he felt like in reviewing the past couple of decades at Ford that the foundation had project-funded nonprofits to death, and he was interested in larger block grants. And so I'm very interested in how this might be the beginning of a larger trend in philanthropy. We might see a dozen or more Mackenzie Scotts emerge that give $5, $10, $15 million gifts to a whole set of civic institutions. We're undergoing the largest generational transfer of wealth in human history. There's certainly enough philanthropic money in the world to allow for that. I'm curious how that's going to play out, given the kind of Darren Walker, Mackenzie Scott leadership on that. I think there's a second side of that which is going to be fascinating, which is how will nonprofits be judged with what they do with that money? And you know, there's been negative press recently on the Black Lives Matter Foundation. I don't believe it is all warranted. I think that they are under scrutiny that they probably shouldn't be under, and yet there it is in articles everywhere from the New York Post, I believe Vanity Fair. What did they do with the larger amounts of money, the tens of millions of dollars that they received in the summer of 2020? The reason I bring that up is because it's not specifically about the Black Lives Matter Foundation. It is any nonprofit organization that receives large unrestricted gifts, Mackenzie Scott, et cetera, ought to be prepared to withstand a different kind of scrutiny. One of the reasons for project-based gifts is that they're defined and specific and bounded. The foundation says you should do X, Y, Z, and if you do it, you've kind of met the terms of the grant. Large unrestricted gifts don't operate that way. They allow for lots more freedom. It will be very interesting to see the kind of scrutiny that they invite and the kind of nonprofits which thrive in that environment and the kinds that don't. Again, fairly or unfairly. Fairly or unfairly.
Thank you. You put your finger on a really important emerging trend, and we'll have more time to talk about this in various ways as we progress with the discussion this morning. Mary, tell us just a little bit more about Hollins and your reaction to the data that was released this morning.
Happy to. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. As you mentioned, I'm the president of Hollins University. We are a 180-year-old institution. And as you said, Peter, we serve women at the undergraduate level and are gender inclusive at the graduate level. Hollins is a small liberal arts institution located in beautiful Roanoke, Virginia. We were the first women's college in Virginia and among the first wave of women's colleges nationally. And I share that because this context matters as we think about philanthropy, both from a broad higher ed perspective, but also for liberal arts colleges, and in my case, particularly women's colleges. From a women's college perspective, fundraising was often hampered by social constraints on women employment opportunities, the fact that women's giving was often secondary to their spouses and other male faculty members. So at a small women's liberal arts college, we have lots of ground to make up for in terms of giving, and giving really matters to us. For any higher ed institution, I mean, there are really only three ways that we generate revenue: tuition and auxiliary dollars, endowment draws, and annual giving. So we only have a few ways of generating revenue in order to live into our mission. So we pay very, very close attention to giving strategies, to giving trends. I am thrilled about how Eboo entered the conversation about giving, because women are really coming into their own controlling philanthropy. When you think about the names of folks who are making a real impact with philanthropy now, it's women, and I know we'll come back to that, but that certainly matters as the president of a women's college, because women give to their alma maters. They really focus on impact giving, and I know we'll come back to that later. When I first looked at the data, I had a couple of immediate reactions. You know, the decline in education giving in 2021 was very concerning to me, though I realize that the decline is in part because there was a big bump the prior year, and when you look at the 2-year data, we're up. But I would say in my experience, institutions are seeing declines in alumni participation and also a decrease in annual giving. So while big gifts may be up and may be driving that increase, I think we are seeing more declines in annual giving, which are concerning because that's what sustains a higher ed institution over time. So that is a little bit concerning to me. Some of what I'm reading into that decline, I'm worried about what it may be foreshadowing. For example, is the student debt conversation having an impact on alum giving? Is that what we're seeing as driving some of that decline in 2021? How much of the great increase in 2020 was one-time giving? I'm concerned about that. I also found myself really concerned about the decline in bequests because that's a particularly important modality for women's colleges and for higher ed overall. Though I know Kate and you, Peter, have shared that that tends to be one of the more volatile components. A decline in bequest is worrisome for me. And then the last thing that I will add is that we entered into or began having conversation about a bear market on the day I read the data. So I'm really concerned about the impact of inflation and a recession going forward. Even more, I think I'm worried about the fears of a recession in terms of philanthropy, yes, but also in terms of enrollment in higher education, whether at the undergraduate or graduate levels. And if you impact philanthropy and enrollment, you've then impacted two of the three ways that we generate revenue to function. So those were a couple of my immediate impressions there.
Thank you. Well, Hollins is fortunate to have a leader like you as you head into that rough terrain, perhaps, going forward. Thanks for being with us. Nathan, tell us a little bit about the Do Good Institute and the work that you do, and then your thoughts about the research as a data analyst.
Thank you, Peter. Happy to, and thank you, Mary and Eboo, for introducing some of the topics that came to mind for me. You know, when I took a look at the data for the first time. Well, I'm here in College Park, Maryland, at the School of Public Policy's Do Good Institute, and what we do at the Do Good Institute, for the most part, in general terms, is train student social entrepreneurs to conceive of their own projects, conceive of their own ways of doing good, and build those out, not just during their college careers, but afterward. The Do Good part comes from the Do Good Challenge, which we have every year. It's a little competition among the best of these social entrepreneurship projects for a little pot of venture capital so that the work can continue after the school year is over. And the research that we do at the Do Good Institute is about philanthropy in general, about civil society in general, a lot of work about volunteering. And that's designed to teach us more about the backdrop and the general characteristics of society into which we're sending our students after they graduate, with hopefully enough civic skills to actually make a difference starting from young adulthood and continuing on. So that's what we do at the Do Good Institute. The work I do is much more in the weeds, typically on a research project, and I didn't actually think that I would be closer to 20,000 feet above these results, farther away than either Mary or Eboo were, judging from their comments. But when I took a look at the results, I had a couple of general reactions. One is the one that Mary just brought up, which is that the result of macroeconomic factors, I think, is going to play a much bigger difference in this year's results than we've seen in the past few years of the Giving USA reports. What we tend to see with Giving USA is that there's a record high or a near record high in the total amount given from all sources to charitable activities. And people always say, well, what happens when you control for inflation? And the answer is nothing much happens, because inflation wasn't much of a factor. Well, in 2021, it was much of a factor. And like Mary said, we need to think about what the ongoing impacts of today's macroeconomic situation are going to be. The other factor that came to mind when I saw the results was even though the total dollar amount given to charity from all sources was at or near a record high once again, I wonder what had happened with the percentage of people who contribute to charity. And that's something that's a trend that's been going in the opposite direction. Even though dollar amounts have been increasing or close to it in real terms over the past few years, the percentage of people who contribute to charitable causes has been declining. And that's something that I think has implications for civil society. I know that Eboo touched on a couple of the countervailing trends that hopefully are going to act in the opposite direction and prevent this from being too much bad news. But that's something that I've been thinking about for a while. But just in general, when I saw the report, the last reaction I had was, good. Okay, the Giving USA folks, led by the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy team, have done a really good job of putting together a methodology that's robust enough to give us understandable and defensible results, even in really bizarre and unusual economic circumstances. So that's what I think they've done a really good job this year with the report, especially.
Thank you. Just Can we take a minute to talk about the methodology? Because you serve on, you're a data scientist, and you serve on the Advisory Council of Methodology for Giving USA. Well, what is that? What's the challenges with the research? How can we continue to improve it going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you. You've got a history of your own with the Advisory Council on Methodology. It sounds like you were there during times when there were a lot more fundamental methodological questions being discussed. The Advisory Council on Methodology is a mixture of number crunchers like myself and people from throughout the sector who are able to look at the results and tell the researchers whether or not they make sense. And the contributions of the practitioners and the interpreters of the results are at least as important as those of the number crunchers. I'm actually in a small group of number crunchers who get together with the analysts and talk about the really fine details, but the larger group, the larger council doesn't really have those conversations anymore. The great thing about the council is that over the years, they've figured out how to generate reports that make sense to the practitioners, that look like what people are seeing, even though if people who are not looking at the numbers. And they're also able to keep up with the times and deal with new problems that the analysts are running into. Like, for instance, there's always been a lag in reporting from the IRS in the data that we need to put a report like this together. But that lag has become much more of a problem in recent years. And so the Lilly Family School team has done a good job of figuring out how to deal with those problems. They've also been able to tackle problems like what to do with the increase in money that's going to donor advised funds and what difference that makes on the results. And they found a really good way of handling that allows further exploration into what happens when the money goes into donor advised funds. Right now, they just capture it by saying that all the money goes to public and societal benefit into that category, because that's where donor advised funds are located, unless they're managed by single issue charities. Just methodological decisions like that, once you make them, then you can talk about them and put them in the footnotes, and everybody understands how to move forward. But that's what we do, I think, on the council, is just listen to the analysts explain the decisions that they've made and just nudge them in a different direction if necessary.
Well, we appreciate you doing that work. To have people like you on that council is really, really helpful. Thank you. Mary, I want to get back to giving to education here for a minute. As you noted, it did drop slightly, but if you look in the 2-year picture, it looks a little better. To what degree does this reflect what you're experiencing at Hollins? And while we're at it, what are you and Hollins University trying to do about encouraging more broad-based giving, which might be the future of major gifts? Tell us a little bit. And I know that you got a pretty big gift last year. Maybe you could just share that with us a little bit too.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for the question. I mean, yes, overall, the data reflect our experiences here. Giving was up, but again, annual giving across the sector seems to be down. So maybe I'll talk about this in sort of 2 categories. What does it mean to get a major gift? And then what are some of the challenges that we see as a result of that, if that's helpful? I am very proud to say that an anonymous donor gave Hollins a $75 million gift in 2021. We announced it on December 9th. It is the largest gift we've ever received, certainly. It's also the largest gift ever given to a women's college. And as if receiving a phenomenal gift like $75 million wasn't enough, it's a gift that we will receive in 3 installments of $25 million each, which means the impact is immediate. So it's not a bequest, but we've actually received the first $25 million payment. And that is, I don't have words to convey what an amazing gift that is. It's a statement of belief in the mission, the vision, and the future of Hollins, yes. But it's also a really big statement about the belief in the role of women's colleges. And it was a challenge to other institutions and to donors in their universe to think through how they can support their institutions. And I have been most moved when I've heard fellow presidents say, this gift inspired a big gift for their institutions as well. I know that would make the donor proud to realize that they are encouraging gifts for other institutions also. So there is something tremendous about being the recipient of a gift such as that. I think the gift signals really two things for us nationally. One, it really calls us to something that Eboo mentioned, which is what is your responsibility when you receive a significant gift? I might argue any gift, but certainly when you receive a significant gift. And we've talked a lot on campus and off about the fact that this gift is a starting point, not a finish line. When you receive a major gift like this, you have, I believe, a moral and financial obligation to do more, to wake up each morning and ask, what can you do to be worthy of this gift? So I think that scrutiny that Eboo spoke about a little while ago, one should self-impose that, right? When someone agrees to give you a gift such as this, then you really have to be prepared to give 100%. And everyone around you, this is not just for the leader, everyone has to continue to step up and give. And so that was part of the message when we announced the gift, is that this gift is a challenge to everyone. Your $50 gift still matters. Your $100 gift still matters. So it has to be a calling forth more than anything else. I think a big gift signals that. I also think in this case, because it was given to us by a woman, an alumna, it really speaks to women's philanthropy writ large and how it's shifting. So I'll say again, when you think about major donors right now, it's Mackenzie Scott, Melinda Gates, I'll toss Oprah in there. These are women who are deeply investing in education, and we know that women's philanthropy is critical right now. From Hollins' perspective, not only do we need to access these women to help support our mission and what we do, but we have a call to help educate and create those women who want to give back. That's what our mission calls us to every day. So we are caught in this really sort of meta place of needing to be able to look for and accept and leverage these gifts while creating the next generation of women who are going to go out and do this type of giving. I'll just add to one other point about why these gifts matters, and then I'll talk about some of the complications around it. You know, I think there's a realization right now, and we see this in the data. I think we see it particularly in 2020, that we have to help those who are disproportionately negatively impacted by things in society, whether it's giving to PSBs, institutions focused on racial justice and inclusion, or education. I think we realize that we have to invest in those who have been systemically disenfranchised. So right now, Hollins serves 40% Pell eligible institutions, and many of our sister institutions that are women's colleges are also access institutions. So we are in a space where we need to build endowment so that we can create access. We're doubling down on that across women's colleges. But we also have to invest in the people-heavy structures that ensure student success. And again, while I think it's particularly true for women's colleges, I would imagine that most presidents are saying now, student success structures are critically important, and that's daily operational support. And that's where you run into a little bit of a challenge. The challenge is, as we look at younger donors, they tend to want to give by cause, as opposed to giving to an organization. So they want an urgent need that their gift will meet, as opposed to, listen, we've got to really support mental health counselors, and that's an annual fund type gift. So I think that shift is kind of challenging for us right now, as we see generationally folks moving away from giving is the right thing to do to now, let me give to a particular cause, a particular interest. And, you know, I think there's room for conversation on education used to be a cause. And I think there might be some national debate now as to whether we are a cause that people want to give to. And that's a more complicated conversation, probably for a different time.
Thank you. There's a lot there, and we'll maybe have a chance to unpack that. as we go forward here. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about giving to religion. Eboo, in your book, We Need to Build Field Notes for a Diverse Democracy, you stress religious pluralism is critical to our future as a democracy. Can you talk about that for a minute? And how is religious motivated giving, which by the way is still the largest destination of giving in the U.S., help to establish our society today? And say something about how and why we need to expand the tent from the Judeo-Christian tradition to a broader pluralism.
Yeah. You just asked me to write 3 books with those 3 questions there, Peter. I want to say 2 things by preface. Number one, please forgive my background. I'm teaching a seminar at DePaul University. I'm sitting on a floor of a classroom right now with an iPad on a chair. So it's less than an ideal background, but this is the reason for this fidgeting and this weirdness behind me. The second thing I want to say is just how much I appreciate Mary Hinton and just the depth of the insight and just the high moral integrity of what for a president to say, our work begins when we get a $75 million gift and we now elevate. There's a language for this, and there's a term for this in Islamic Arabic. It's called ihsan. It's excellence. It's like a holy excellence. I just think that that's the best of the philanthropic, the civic, the higher ed, the tradition in the United States, right? And the social innovator tradition, which is basically philanthropy funds exceptional leaders and exceptional institutions, and those people set a new bar. Those people set a new bar, right? Things cannot be, I had a colleague and a friend who once said, things I want it to be said of me, things can never be average again after I do what I do. So that's how I view you, Mary, right? And what you've said, right? Small colleges, once they get a gift like this, you have set the bar on how they feel like they should do their work. And I find that really inspiring. So
Thank
Peter,
you,
so one of the most remarkable and least commented things about America's diverse civil society is that religious communities build institutions that serve people of all religions. And we take it so much for granted that we forget what an exception it is in human history. So let me offer this as a counterpoint. And this is a story in my book. And Peter, I appreciate very much you kind of lifting up my book as kind of an illustration of some of the themes we're talking about here. So this is a story I tell in my book. It's from a front page article in the New York Times 8 or 10 years ago. When there is a fire on the Catholic side of town in the city of Mostar in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Muslim fire department does not respond. When there is a fire on the Muslim side of town, the Catholic fire department does not respond. And the article goes on to describe a city which incidentally is not in hot conflict. Okay, this is not a guns blazing civil war. It is a city in which every civic institution, the schools, the nightclubs, the soccer teams, the garbage collection companies, every civic institution is separated by ethnic and religious lines. Muslims start their own garbage collection company, and those garbage trucks don't go to Catholic neighborhoods. Okay, so now let's consider our situation in the United States, where you have 6 refugee resettlement organizations founded by particular faith communities who spend most of their efforts resettling people from other religions in the United States, where you have 230 Catholic colleges and universities, all but 5 or so of which educate people from atheist to Zoroastrian. The same thing can be said for the 120 Methodist colleges and universities, the 25 or so ELCA colleges, the 75 or so Presbyterian colleges. The same can be said for hospitals, social service agencies, on and on. Religious communities in the United States build institutions, colleges, hospitals, refugee resettlement agencies, social services agencies, as an expression of their faith identity, I am a better Muslim when I volunteer with and participate in the programs of the Inner City Muslim Action Network. Precisely because its health clinic, its arts programs, its prisoner reentry programs served the Baptists and Jehovah's Witnesses and atheists and Hindus and Pentecostals of Market Park. I think that this is an absolutely key layer of American civil society. The Bridgespan Group did a study a couple of years ago in which they asked the question of 6 cities in the United States, what percentage of the social services infrastructure is built or funded or somehow run by religious communities? The number was from 35% to 70%. Okay, so from San Francisco to Amarillo, Texas, from Detroit to DC, it is religious communities that are doing this work. So one of the mental exercises that I invite people to do in, book talks and the like is, imagine if all the faith-based institutions in your city disappeared overnight. What would be gone in the morning? And let's not just talk synagogues, churches, and mosques. Let's talk preschools and colleges and hospitals and law schools and the like. I think for the 2 of the types of giving we've talked about today, one is massive gifts. You can't run a law school or a hospital without massive gifts. You just can't, right? But secondly, the everyday giving of everyday families. That is a way of participating in civil society. Not only does it support the mental health counselors at Hollins University, right? That's super important, but it's also a way of a household saying, I participate in America's diverse democracy. So I think we should lift up the genius of American civilization in our religious pluralism, and I think that we should be concerned about the atrophying of religious belonging and religious giving and what it might mean, when those Catholic schools where 50% of the kids are poor and not Catholic, when they close because there aren't people going to the Catholic Church anymore and putting $20 in the till.
So that's really fascinating. Thank you. And Nathan, giving to religion is declining as a percentage of the total, although it has continued to climb modestly in dollar amounts. Some people think that's because, and Eboo's suggesting this, we're a less church society, if that's the right word. But what is that? Does that portend something? Is there a way you can project whether that portends something for the future of giving writ large?
Well, it's the reason why this is such an important issue, besides the reasons that Eboo talks about, the importance of faith-based activities and faith-based organizations in our civil society. The reason why it's important from a Giving USA dollar amount standpoint is because giving to religious organizations is far and away the most important destination of charitable contributions. And when you look at trend data, not the data that's typically published in the report, unless you look at the tables at the end, but if you look at trend data over the past 30, 40 years, it's been a while since there's been a significant increase controlling for inflation in the amount of money that goes to religious organizations. And I think in something like 5 of the past 7 years, I'm going from memory here because I just looked at the numbers, there's been a decrease either in nominal dollars or in real dollars. So the pessimist would take a look at those numbers and say that the situation that Eboo was worried about, that he cautioned us against, might actually be starting. I don't know if we could say that, but the growth, when you see growth, typically, I think, in the overall amount of money going to nonprofits of all kinds or charitable causes of all kinds, then it's typically not due to the fact that more money is going to religious organizations, or religious causes.
Thank you. I'm going to take a break here from my questions. And Kate, I wonder if we have any questions from the audience that you'd like to share at this point?
We sure do, Peter. So I'm going to start with a methodology question. Nathan, maybe you can tease this out a little bit for the audience today. We know that giving to foundations has been on a steady increase over time as more individuals are are sharing their resources with their private foundations. And there's a question about going forward to what degree the methodology will account for more slicing and dicing of what we mean by foundations, especially when we think about the fact that community foundations are accounted for in the foundation category. And in addition to giving directly to foundations, donors are also setting up and giving to donor advised funds. So any kind of sneak peek into the future, more you might want to say about how we can slice and dice this, or will be able to going forward?
Yeah, I think two things come to mind in terms of data availability right now for private foundations as well as donor advised funds. With private foundations, we're currently those of us who use data that IRS publishes, we're currently trying to figure out how to convince IRS to release more data from private foundations that are filed on Forms 990-PF. They used to be really good about it up until about 5 or 6 years ago with a lag, but at least the data came out. Now the lags are much longer and many foundations are not reporting data. So this is something that Giving USA's analysts are struggling with. So getting more information about private foundations, I think we'd settle now, right, for getting back to the status quo of, say, 2015. With donor advised funds, though, there's been real improvements in the methodology that people have, and that's primarily due to a couple of actually young academics who have worked with the people who process contributions to donor advised funds and store data on those contributions in the cloud. These analysts have worked with these data providers to convince them to give up data on actual contributions made to donor advised funds, and I think more importantly, contributions made from donor advised funds. So that's something that the Giving USA Foundation has published a spotlight report recently that talks about that, and there's much more exciting research that can be done in the future. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm not just saying that because they're friends of mine. It's really good stuff.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. For all of the obvious good reasons, a lot of the discussion today has been focusing on the prevalence and the role of mega gifts in the philanthropic environment. And there's a great question here from one of our participants acknowledging that, most of the organizations that are recognized as social benefit organizations, nonprofit organizations in the United States have relatively small budgets, and they also rely heavily on individual donors, individual philanthropy. So, this is sort of a question for the group, Peter included, of course, which is what kind of themes do we think we can take away from this report that really will resonate with smaller organizations that are, really reliant on individual donations?
Well,
Anybody
I might
want
make
to take
a comment first, if that's okay, and then ask the panelists to contribute also. I mean, every year when we present this data, we talk about how important it is for smaller organizations to build any kind of program of individual giving that they possibly can. The Chronicle of Philanthropy this morning noted that the giving from individual pie is shrinking, and that's true, but I don't think it's fully illustrative of what's happening if you consider the giving to foundations that people are doing, to create their own foundations. If you consider giving to donor advised funds, which Nathan mentioned a minute ago, if you consider bequests. And so what we find is smaller organizations sometimes really find they have a focus on corporate and foundation giving because they can get significant grants that really make a difference, but they must spend time building a program of individual giving. And I think that extends to planned giving, that if you can just send out invitations on a quarterly basis to consider including your organization in one's estate plans, that those differences, that makes a difference over time. So that's my suggestion.
Really helpful, Peter. Thank you. Eboo, I might ask you to comment on a question about the public society benefit sector. I am making an assumption that Interfaith America is probably characterized in this sector of the report, and There's a comment in here about, first of all, what do we mean by public society benefit organizations? So, you know, that includes a lot of organizations that I would imagine are operating in partnership with and adjacent to Interfaith America, working on civil society, civil rights, et cetera, and that these organizations do appear to capture significant individual donor support. And at the same time, I know that in some of our prep conversations, you commented that your organization has been the beneficiary of some really significant foundation grants and partnerships. So I'm just wondering if you might have any thoughts or observations about what people working in the public society and benefit sector should take away from the report and or be thinking about as they move their fundraising and donor engagement programs forward.
So I don't really know what that, I don't have enough of a handle on that term to fully know what it means, which doesn't mean I can't riff for 3 or 4 minutes on random interesting thoughts that I might have. So, you know, it's a panel discussion. I might as well do that. I think we're at an interesting, dangerous, fascinating moment in American life in an American civil society, right? Which is the late 19th and early 20th century is probably the closest analog. The kind of macro level changes back then, massive immigration, the move from agricultural societies to an agricultural society to urban society, et cetera, et cetera. Part of what you have is whole forms of new participation in civic life with interesting partnerships with philanthropy. So I actually think the most remarkable one is the Julius Rosenwald example of, here's a Jewish guy in Chicago inspired by his rabbi to partner with a set of Black leaders to help build 5,000 Black schools with participation from Black communities, right? And a remarkable number of YMCAs also. I think to myself, we are at a similar moment, and do we have ways in which the mega dollars that are out there can partner with local communities to not to say, you know, I'm going to replace what you do, you know, me, Melinda Gates or Melinda Fretch or Mackenzie Scott, you know, I can replace what you do, but instead we can partner together, right? There are things that I can give, which I should give because it's just an ethical obligation. And there are things that there's ways you can participate also. I think that that's a really interesting and useful model. I want to say a second thing here, which is the way that I would characterize Interfaith America is we are a creative civic institution that is attempting to build or rebuild an American sector in religious diversity, right? So the way I think about this is that there's a number of great themes in American life: civil liberties, racial equity, women's empowerment, environmental stewardship. And in any one of those areas, you have a vital civic institution, or more than one vital civic institution, right? And they're name brand places, the ACLU and civil liberties, the Sierra Club and environmental stewardship, et cetera, et cetera. So the question of how people from diverse religious backgrounds interact with each other and its impact on American civic and political life, that's a massive question. It is an original question in the American experiment. And frankly, since the days of the NCCJ in the mid-20th century, we have not had a vital civic institution, right, along the lines of an ACLU that steps up and says, we take responsibility. We take responsibility. So that's what we seek to be at Interfaith America, and not as the Walmart of this, right, but as an institution which nurtures a field of vital civic institutions to engage this great theme. I think that this is the kind of social innovation logic that I think of as similar to the Harlem Children's Zone, which is basically a remarkable leader in a Jeffrey Canada says, I'm going to build a model in Harlem. And the only way to do this is with serious money, like Stan Druckenmiller type money, right? But really this should be in 1,000 places. So we're gonna figure out we're gonna use tens of millions of dollars through my elite connections, Jeffrey Canada, to figure out how this works. And then we're going to see this in hundreds and hundreds of other places. And in those places, local communities, including governments, have to support it. So that's kind of my, kind of platonic model of how social change and institution building works in America, such as it is.
Eboo, those comments remind me, Mary, we've just got a little bit of time here left. And I did want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion for a minute, because there are so many nonprofits trying to make an impact there. Firms like Campbell and Company trying to help these organizations make a difference and make an impact. I watched your TED Talk, Leading from the Margins, and you have a specific idea, perhaps, of how we can create leadership models that are different and create opportunity for people. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks to Eboo and to Nathan for their very good thoughts. I'm so proud to be a member of the Interfaith America board. And in fact, I think that what Eboo described is part of what I try to hit on in my TED Talk. We have leadership talent and strengths. We have philanthropic talent and strength that we ignore because it doesn't fit sort of a preconceived notion of what it means to be philanthropic or what it means to be a leader. And I think part of what this data, at least to me, is calling on us to do is to think about what are the communities that we've ignored, where are the communities that we've not paid attention to that have a deep vested interest in our success, whether we're a public social benefit or an educational institution. There are communities that care deeply. We know that while 40% of families, according to the Lilly data, 40% of families supported social justice protests in 2020, only 14% gave financially. Black families, LGBTQ families, and single women were disproportionately represented in that 14%. And yet those are communities that we don't always look to first, even though that's where support is. So I think what we have to do is stop assuming that our only philanthropic hope is going to be among the uber wealthy and the center, as important as that may be, but also think about who have we not turned to traditionally? What individuals have we chosen not to look to for support? What haven't we grown at our institutions? I'm speaking from education here. Have we intentionally grown philanthropy in a philanthropic mindset? I think that's really important. And coming out of this great moment, one thing that we saw at Hollins was our Black Alumni Association was eager to give to a particular commitment that we made at Hollins. It wasn't annual fund, but their gift has created tremendous opportunity. But we had not historically thought about the strength that that particular community might bring to Hollins. So the call on all of us is to think broadly and to go back, and I know we only have 2 minutes, but to the question from the small nonprofit, what about those of us looking at regular individuals for gift? All of these folks are regular individuals whose humanity we have to respect, appreciate, find alignment with our mission, engage them as thought partners, and they will give, they will support our organizations. That's the one thing that is clear in this data. People want to support our work. How do we reach all of the people eager to support us?
Well, I wanted to have time for everybody to say a last moment or last word, but we've used up our time with all this wonderful dialogue. Let me just say, Mary, and to those who are here, that in your TED Talk, you tell of an experience where you ask your high school counselor about college, and he or she, whomever, advises you not to aspire toward college, that shouldn't be part of your future. And boy, were they ever wrong. And Eboo, it reminds me of what you say in your book about with all the positive efforts being made toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, sometimes we measure people by how we perceive their deficits rather than their assets. And so maybe that's a word of wisdom going forward, that we think about people's assets and not deficits as we move forward in fundraising and try to make the world more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I know we're running out of time here. Kate, you're going to close the webinar. I just want to thank our panelists. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Incredible, and as usual, we probably should have planned a 3-hour session. So thank you, really, for your straight talk, your words of inspiration. I think you've given us a glimpse, and quite frankly, you have put on the table some really great, challenging questions about the kinds of things that people who are working at the center of the nonprofit and philanthropic enterprise should be thinking about. So much gratitude to the three of you. Peter, thank you for your partnership today in this webinar, and we're so excited to be able to share the results, but more importantly, to really be able to talk about not only what the results mean in a real-life context, but what are some of the bigger issues that are driving philanthropy across the country. So with that, I want to encourage everyone to grab a copy of the Giving USA 2022 report. You can do that at givingusa.org. It's a subscription program now, which means that you'll get access to ongoing insights and research throughout the year. And for those of you who put questions in the chat that we were not able to get to today, we will follow up with you by email. And with that, just want to wish everyone a great day and a great year ahead, and we wish you all the best. Thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thank you.